Last Pint Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content including Winnie Cooper, Chuck Norris, and Jonathan Brandis. Listener discretion is advised.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die.
That kid is back on the escalator again.
Leave it alone.
What?
Ain't no man better than me, because there ain't no man around who ain't old or full of mischief.
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you. But I can carry you.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me. I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Wow.
Wow, it's the new way.
Wow, welcome to the New Way. Wow. Hello and welcome to the New Way podcast, your one-stop shop for pop culture. Movies.
Sure.
I'm going to keep working on that tagline until we get a really, really good, solid one in here. But I am Matt Schenk. I'm here in studio with Benjamin Effortless Wilson.
What's up, guys? And back to the old school. Just me and Matt in a room, you know, just with our...
it's just two guys. We're like...
two guys with our wangs in our hands.
We're like Lennon and McCartney just mutually masturbating. And did you see that soundbite this week? But Mr. McCartney, Sir Paul, you don't have to tell us. You don't owe that story to anyone anymore. Like, really, do you have to sell your new album that bad? You have to break out the embarrassing.
Hear this.
He told a story that he and John like would mutually masturbate together, and then they had some like weird like random three-way when they were younger. But there's like some story that just came out in an interview with him this week.
Wow.
And it's like, wow.
Let's bring back the wow.
Yeah, like I felt kind of bad. Like he doesn't need to be doing salacious things anymore. He's the fucking Beatle. Like he's done it all.
I mean, I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, I think that at this stage in his life, that's a perfectly fine thing to share. I mean, hey, it's all about love.
I don't know.
I'm just joking.
I don't know. Like it's not the most embarrassing, horrible, awful thing to admit to, but it also seems like something that you do like to, like, because you're hungry for the attention, or you feel you've got to share something extra, or you've got to be the bad boy. Like, he doesn't need to do any of that shit.
I don't think that Paul McCartney has anything to prove. I think you're right, but I don't. Maybe I can't put myself in his shoes because I don't know Paul McCartney. But anyways, I would just say
grab your penis, Ben, and join along.
That was the Ringo there. That totally sounds like something Ringo would say.
Well, I imagine the Ringo story is gonna be like, "Oh yeah, I watched. It was great. I watched it all."
Regardless, it is just Matt and I today. Sorry.
So yeah,
ladies and gentlemen,
Nick is on assignment at Nick's Tap. Where is he? What city and state is he in?
I believe right now he is in Illinois, or just south of Illinois somewhere. That he's in Indiana,
where the Nazis come from. As I learned in the Blues Brothers movie.
Yes. Yeah. So who knows? He's off gallivanting about.
Off on assignment. So yeah, just Ben and me following up a very packed episode with four of us in here, which as of the recording of this episode, I'm still editing the previous episode, but the one you're going to hear that you have probably just listened to may have broken you or broken your radios. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to do just kind of a more simple podcast, and
just kind of, and this is kind of I think a preamble and kind of a warm up to some stuff that we have coming up pretty soon. We do have the Halloween Redux episode on the schedule.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And a couple of other things I think we wanted to bring some,
This is a palate cleanser and a palate, what's a pre-palate?
Whetter.
Yes, that is correct.
Emphasis on the
Sweater. Oh, that sounds good on these mics. You really feel that breathy wetness. Breathy Wetness, by the way, is the name of my my band.
I think that should be the name of your first album.
We are Wild Stallions with Breathy Wetness.
Yeah,
I like
works.
it. I buy it. One thing we I think we half drunkenly stumbled into it on the last podcast, but I wanted to spend just a couple minutes on it. Is that we did lose a movie great last week with Burt Reynolds.
Who I've met.
You have met Burt Reynolds.
I have. He took me out to lunch.
Really?
With me and about 60 other people.
Okay, tell your Burt Reynolds story.
Okay, so by the way,
I did not know that this was not planned.
Well, Burt Reynolds was one of the actual co-founders when it comes to the capital that was necessary to start the FSU Film School.
Okay.
1988. He was the one who put forth many millions of dollars, even in that day and age, to really promote that as being a good thing, because Burt Reynolds went to FSU.
Yes, he did.
No. Anyways, so he would come back like biannually and would take the film students to do something, like it would take them places or whatever. And so he ended up taking, it was my sophomore year, which means the upperclassmen, the people who were in thesis cycle, it was their junior year. They ended up just taking those two classes, I believe, and we went to Ruby Tuesday, which is very funny.
Burt Reynolds' favorite.
Burt Reynolds' favorite.
He loves a salad bar.
It was at a weird time of the year where we were in between semesters, so not everybody was in town. So it wasn't like, I think like 60 people were invited or 70 people were invited, but there were only like 40 people there actually in town. So it wasn't like this crazy thing or whatever. But anyways, he said he would answer any questions or whatever. He did this little talk beforehand in the student or the Studio Center A and the FSU Film School. But anyways, the ironic part is I had no problem with Burt Reynolds, never had any sort of problem with Burt Reynolds whatsoever. The one person who did have a problem with Burt Reynolds, or the answer that Burt Reynolds gave him, was Barry Jenkins.
Oh, really?
Because Barry was talking about the lack of African American or people of color filmmakers,
sure,
and his experience with that. And Burt Reynolds, I'm paraphrasing here, his answer is basically like the cream rises to the top.
Ooh, wow.
It's a paraphrase, but Barry took some kind of offense to that, and this is one of those very like congenial events where
some kind of offense
like,
to that.
I bought a salad bar for all of you motherfuckers.
Wow.
But anyways, it was so Barry, I think, gave him an answer back, and I just remember Burt Reynolds just kind of looking like, what the fuck are you talking to me? Anyways, it was a very interesting experience. So I never actually personally met him, but I was there in his presence.
Sure. Well,
I didn't ask any questions or whatever. I didn't do anything along those lines. But
it's kind of interesting. So we're broadcasting from South Florida, and Burt was a staple of Jupiter, Florida, which is just north of us, where I grew up, actually. There's the Burt Reynolds Theater, which I did theater at,
right.
And he used to have a property out in Jupiter Farms, which is where I saw my meeting Burt Reynolds experience was watching him tape an episode of Win, Lose, or Draw.
Well, he used his clout to shoot Dukes of Hazzard 2 in South Florida.
Yeah, we shot a bunch of shit down here. He shot Midnight Shade, was his like really bad sitcom that was on in the late 80s, and a bunch of that shit was shot down here.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So yeah, and it was funny. So I go on Facebook when Burt dies.
Why does it not surprise me that Burt Reynolds was a straight up Floridian?
Yeah. I mean, he really latched into the Florida lifestyle as he got older. Like it was kind of interesting, but he went
to FSU to begin. I mean, he's like I said, he's one of those guys that like went to Florida and came back.
Yeah. He enjoys it, and it was funny is I go on Facebook and I'm seeing all of these personal interaction stories with Burt Reynolds because he was so much a part of everything down here. And so I send a text to my mom, kind of baiting a little bit, because I know that she has some like I vaguely remember some anti Burt Reynolds story in her,
of course,
oeuvre of shitty. Everyone is a terrible person, and she's like, oh yeah, he was really bad with
the everyone a terrible person in Florida thing is not totally
off, but
especially when it's later in life. I think Andrew Gillum, maybe hopefully you listen to this podcast, you can just the new Florida logo. Come to Florida, you can be crazy or lazy. I don't know, something along those lines. I mean, just something that kind of fits that.
That would be great. Yeah,
just lean in. Just lean into
the Florida.
Lean into the Florida-ness.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of Gillum's stuff right now should just be pro Burt Reynolds like stories. Like if he wins, he'll tell us all of the like deep dark Burt Reynolds secrets if he wins. I think that's the way to get to it. But yeah, it
sucks to lose. So I mean, the guy, and also I think that one of the things that's interesting is because I was never a Burt Reynolds fan growing up. I was not a fan of Dukes of Hazzard. I wasn't like
you mean Cannonball Run, or you mean Smokey and the Bandit, not Dukes of Hazzard.
Smokey and the Bandit, Dukes of Hazzard.
I was like, I don't know what this retcon of Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, because he was in the Jay Shutter Seekers. Dukes of Hazzard as Boss Hogg. So
that's probably what it was. I had some weird crossover there. But anyways, yeah, Smokey and the Bandit, and but anyways, I was not a fan of like young Burt Reynolds. Like my dad wasn't a fan of. It wasn't like raised on these films. It wasn't something that I ever watched. But honestly, like I knew who Burt Reynolds was just out of reputation and just because I knew what Smokey and the Bandit was or whatever. And I remember watching Smokey and the Bandit for the first time and being like, it's okay. I prefer Vanishing Point, I prefer the one that's neo-noir, shot in the desert, with 20-minute periods with no dialogue.
Entirely different movies.
Categorically
different movies.
Are you surprised, Matt? Are you surprised? No, that I didn't like because here's the thing. I
prefer Duel to the Transformers films because I'm going to watch a truck go something.
If I was going to watch somebody wisecracking, I wanted somebody who's a little bit more off kilter, like Kurt Russell. Like I was more along the Kurt Russell lines of being like, I want somebody who's a little bit more unhinged.
Okay,
than just being kind of suave,
But Burt in Boogie Nights.
But that's where it was.
Yeah.
So when Boogie Nights came out, I was just like, man, it's not just Burt being Burt. It's actually a fantastic performance.
He's never been better than he was in Boogie Nights.
Also in Mystery Alaska, a movie I really like, a really underrated sports movie, and he's really good in that movie too.
Jay Roach,
even though a very small role where he's the mayor of this town.
Yeah,
it's a very well served role, and he does it really well. And I was just like, you know what, the guy actually has really great chops. I mean, he's got at that age. I mean, this.
Well, he's always had his timing's always perfect.
Yes.
And part of what makes his role in Boogie Nights so good is some of the baggage that comes from it. And
sure, of course.
And I would argue, as far as comeback roles, I know everyone gets off and loves fucking Travolta in Pulp Fiction, and I like Travolta in Pulp Fiction, but I think Burt Reynolds in Boogie Nights is a much more impressive.
Travolta in Pulp Fiction could have been played by a lot of people.
Yes, and I think what Reynolds does in Boogie Nights, and it's just some of his timing on his throwaway lines. It's such a dirty line, but it's like aim for her tits when he's got the cigar and he's watching him with Roller Girl for the first time, and it's just this like this is his everyday life, and he just throws away a line. It's so well delivered and so good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And so I've heard plenty of negative things about Burt Reynolds, but I also read a ton of positive stories last week of just personal interactions with him. So it sounds like he was an interesting character, but he really affected a lot of local, people that I'm friendly with that are like, oh yeah, here's my Burt Reynolds story. Everyone had a Burt Reynolds story. It was pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, and that's awesome, and that's the reason why I would never be disparaging about something like that.
Sure.
And that's why I was like, I wouldn't presupposed to think that even Barry necessarily has a bad opinion of Burt Reynolds. No. I think it was more about the opinion of a 21-year-old versus Burt Reynolds in that sort of moment where he was just like saying basically like, if you're going to be a really good director, then just be a really good director. It doesn't matter what color you are, which is probably what Burt meant.
Yeah, which is total bullshit though for his, and that's and I think that's the problem with a lot of these older actors. I mean, he's getting definitely up in years at that time. That's 2004, 2005.
It was 2003.
Yeah, like so. I mean, he was Boogie Nights. He was older, and he hated Paul Thomas Anderson, and then bashed the movie after the fact because he didn't understand certain things and they didn't get along well. It seemed he definitely did not like the new guard of filmmakers coming up, which makes sense because he was doing this in the fucking 70s, in the fucking Hal Needham days when movies were just fucking crazy and crazy stunts and crazy, I'm sure, booze and womanizing and all kinds of it was a fucking party every time you made a movie, and I guarantee for those older actors that it's a little sadder and when that starts getting clamped down on by you know,
or it's
people
just like,
being good people.
There was a reason why, you know, Burt Reynolds was never in like a Kurosawa film. You know, it's like it's a little bit different when you're, you know, shooting Smokey and the Bandit 3
for sure. But man,
Anyways.
what a hell of a mustache! I mean,
hey,
it's a damn good. I mean, I don't know if he's quite
it's on the Hall of Fame
Selleck status, but it's pretty damn close.
It's in the Hall of Fame. I believe so.
And yeah, the only other thing I wanted to talk about, I got one or two things we can talk about before we get to our main topic, just to fill a little time. I'm gonna go with this one because I want to have Nick for the other one. But so I just there's apparently a big back and forth going on right now about whether or not Henry Cavill has been fired as Superman from any further DC movies.
I haven't followed that close enough.
And I didn't. I basically read a couple of articles today, and it was literally one of those where it's got like 7 updates within 1 hour, meaning that like all of the reps of these different people started to speak up within 1 hour of news breaking, and it's the same story that DC had with Ben Affleck. There's a story like, hey, they're going to fire Ben Affleck, or Ben Affleck's going to quit, and all of a sudden everyone's like, no, don't believe what you're seeing about this. But it sounds like, from what I can tell, is Henry Cavill is either negotiating very strongly to not have to do any more Superman movies, or they're deciding to move in another direction. And
well, let's put it this way. In the past year, Henry Cavill has been in 2 major motion pictures, Justice League and Mission Impossible Fallout. The disparity in quality there is about
ridiculous.
as large of a chasm as you can possibly imagine. Being in like Showgirls 2 and then being in like Sense and Sensibility.
This has happened in our time. This is Eddie Redmayne, the year that he was doing
Jupiter
Theory of
Ascending.
Everything and Jupiter Ascending.
It's possible. Now
it's pretty close.
It's pretty close, and who knows what Eddie Red. I mean, here's the thing. Honest thing, there are parts of that movie I don't even mind. Jupiter Ascending, but his performance in that movie is absolutely just ridiculous. But it's the worst.
They
part
tried
of the
to
movie.
like hide. I love that they literally tried to hide it from the Academy so that it couldn't be used against him for winning an Oscar
That's
in
insane.
another movie. But no, the DC, if you're listening, the problem with your movies right now is not the casting of Henry Cavill as Superman.
Yeah.
It is not the casting of Ben Affleck as Batman. None of your casting actually is really bad. I don't think you've done a poor job in your casting. Fix your fucking movies and fix your universe and your writing.
Red Letter Media did a really good like breakdown when they were talking about Justice League, about how just there are so many missed opportunities like within the construct of the movie, like of the final cut of Justice League, of it being like, if you did this, it would have been better. And I was listening to it, I was just like, holy shit, it would have been way better. And it's just like little changes that like just change timing of a shot.
Yeah.
And things along those lines. And I was just like, it was almost... It almost hurt the movie, I think, to bring Joss. I mean, Joss
Sure.
did what he had to do as being a friend and being
Yeah, but it made a Frankenstein movie that's two tones that are just mashed together poorly.
But then it parts that just looks like a TV show, and I was just like, oh my god, it does. It looks like an episode of Buffy when it should look like a fucking superhero cinematic $200 million movie, and that's absolutely true. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And I was just like, holy shit, it is. It's like a Buffy episode. I mean, that Justice League is a mediocre to poor Monster of the Week episode of Buffy. That's what it is.
I don't disagree with
a
that
couple
assessment.
of really cool moments with decent special effects. That's what it is.
It's got it literally is one scene. It's one good scene in the entire movie, and that's it.
And that's the scene where Superman goes bad.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Yeah.
Apparently that was supposed to be like half of the movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, you had one.
It has nothing to do with fucking Henry Cavill or Ezra Miller or Ben Affleck.
But here's the other message I want to give to DC. Please let Henry Cavill go. Please let him grow. He just got cast as the Witcher, which I don't know anything about, but apparently like comics fans are super excited. He's going to be on a Netflix show, right?
Well, gamer fans. The Witcher is a pretty story. It's imagine if you did like the Elder Scrolls series, like Skyrim and I don't know. You don't know anything about
my
these.
eyes are sort of glazing over a little bit.
For those of you that play games, yes, you know what I'm talking about.
I've heard of those two things before.
This movie is more as opposed to where those games are like an RPG where you can kind of create your own character and be an asshole or be a good guy. The Witcher story already has a main character.
Okay.
Same story construct. It's a very well-developed fantasy world where it's very immersive, but you're kind of already this dude.
Okay.
And the dude is a really cool character.
Kind of already this dude. I like that. I like that. Well, anyway, good for Henry Cavill if you're out of it, and if you still have to do these horrible movies, God help you, and God have mercy on your soul.
We'll see how it works. I mean, I would love for Henry Cavill to be in a Superman movie that doesn't suck. I think that would be great. But
he's going to have to do it under Marvel Superman, or someone else getting, or Patty Jenkins can decide to take over the Superman storyline and maybe do something good with it, like she did with Wonder Woman. But
just bring Nick Cage back. Why not? Just right now, Nick Cage. As Superman.
That is still one of my one of the things I most want to see, and I dread at the same time. But I want to watch that Tim Burton Superman Lives written
by Kevin Smith.
Written by Kevin Smith. I have, by the way, I have that script, and I even have that script where they had made animations and drawn things for. I was obsessed with that movie when it was going to, because I was obsessed with Kevin Smith at the time. But that movie is seriously one of the most batshit fucking god-awful movies. And the idea of Nick Cage anchoring it is the only thing that might just tip it
in the
positive to be like, this movie is so crazy it works. I would watch that movie in a second.
Well, we'll never get that chance, unfortunately.
Never. Listen, this is Nicolas Cage we're talking about. Never say never.
Never say never.
Someone at some point will pitch that to Cage and be like, and if he's in the right amount of,
let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Anyway, let's get on to our main topic of today's podcast, and the topic is Sidekicks. Of course, we're talking about the 1992 Jonathan Brandis
Chuck Norris vehicle. I figured it would come up
with TV's Winnie Cooper on there.
Can I just say something really stupid really fast?
Go for it.
For some reason today, because I was just like, oh, well, we've got to bring up a Sidekicks reference. Sidekicks. He kicked. Oh, my God, he's kicking.
Yes.
I never got it before.
Yes, they are sidekicks of karate.
Maybe I haven't thought about that movie in 25 years for good reason, but I just got it. And I was just like, oh, shit. It's not it's side. Oh, okay. It's a double entendre.
No.
It's the perfect.
Who knew how clever that movie was?
Clever. Like the late 80s, early 90s, just like obsession with having some sort of creative title.
Wait, yeah, so those of you that don't know, there's a movie.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks for helping me out again. That's all right, Chuck. That's what sidekicks are for.
Yeah, that is Jonathan Brandis and Chuck Norris. I watched the trailer of this film today, and I was struck by how I've never seen a movie date itself so bad in just the trailer, much less the entire movie. But the trailer opens...
What's the trailer for Gleaming the Cube?
No. This trailer opens with this movie is about Jonathan Brandis as a kid who idolizes Chuck Norris, and he has these vivid daydreams that he's like
but he's kind of a
sidekick.
nerd, and he's
Yes.
kind of a dweeb, and he doesn't have
in real life he's bullied a lot,
bullied
but in
a
his
lot,
fantasies he's Chuck Norris's sidekick, and they go on these crazy adventures. So the trailer opens with one of his fantasies, which is him coming out of the water with a fully automatic rifle, and he's a kid. He's like a 12-year-old kid, and shooting this like fucking like gigantic machine gun. So I see that and I go, oh my god, I can't believe this is the opening shot of the trailer is Chuck Norris and this kid like mowing down people in a jungle, Predator style. And then maybe like 20 seconds later, he gets pushed down the hallway by a bully who calls him a retard. And I was like, this movie, it literally just kept dating itself every moment of the trailer to where I'm like, this couldn't exist in any other time other than 1992 because it's so terrible.
Great.
But so that's all we're going to talk about for this.
Do you remember watching the movie?
Oh, yes.
See, I remember watching the
Well,
movie too.
I was in love with Winnie Cooper, so I watched any film that Winnie was in. Danica McKellar, who's now a mathematician and yoga guru. That's what her thing is.
Hey, don't disparage her too much. She was in 4 episodes of How I Met Your Mother.
Okay.
No, sorry.
I will have to watch those episodes then.
Don't you talk about her mathematician skills and her
She was in Camp Cucamonga. And,
if she's a yogi, then that's fine.
She's a yogi and mathematician.
That's fine.
So
she was also in How I Met Your Mother.
She's a handsome lady.
Anyways, but no, that it is funny just because of course we had to bring it up because when we were like sidekicks, I was just like, well, of course. But I could have made that joke and instead I just went straight to no time for love, Matt.
which of course I pulled clips of that as well, but we'll get to that in a second.
Wow.
So first things first when we talk about sidekicks is I think let's talk about what makes a good sidekick.
Well, so here's the thing that I think the definition of sidekick is kind of an interesting thing for me. And
okay,
it's actually something that when you first kind of posed the topic, I was just like, that could be kind of a lame discussion, and then I realized that there's actually kind of this wide range. Because I, of course, did a little bit of cursory research. I was like, I want to see what other people say good sidekicks are. I don't want to be the same. Some, I'm sure, of the ones I immediately think of are going to be the same as what other people think. And, of course, like one of them's like the top one of all time. And but others weren't showing up at all. But I think what it did help to me to define is that I feel like there's a much narrower view of sidekick than in maybe popular media than what I view it as.
Okay.
What I view a sidekick as is somebody who's a secondary character who is in some way dichotomically opposed to the main character, whether it's in disposition or whether it is in action or physicality. However, their goal is the same as the main character, and they're there to help further the narrative and further the main character's goal.
Okay.
So, or maybe not further or foil, but ultimately is not a bad guy, but somebody who's there on the side as a good guy.
Okay.
But I think the definitive quality of a sidekick is that they are very different in some way or another from the main character.
Interesting.
From the lead.
No, and that's I kind of have similar-ish. You kind of hit on a lot of the elements I had in there. I broke them out a little bit. One thing I kind of brought up, which is not 100% true all the time, but it's pretty close, which is that they're often humorous. In most of the time, not always, but you can almost always draw some sort of comedic relief from them. I said they're not as attractive as the lead. That's also another seems to be.
In one of the main instances, the sidekick is the straight man.
Yes,
in a couple of
okay. All right. Actually, that works on a couple of the ones that I have as well. So I did that. I said witty banter. I said they are often smarter than the lead. Which I think is kind of an interesting thing.
I think wiser than the lead.
Yes.
Is a better thing.
They're
Maybe
often
not smarter.
It's part of what you said that they are a foil. So they are filling in the things that the lead doesn't present, and only together they lock to make the perfect whatever.
Exactly.
And I did have that some of them often have a reluctance to enter the fray. So they never shy away once they're in it, but they're always the ones that are kind of like, let's not let's not go do this whole crazy thing. But once they're in it, then they're going to help out.
Or
and do
they're
their
the
thing.
ones, or the main character is the one with all the trepidation. They're the ones completely
Yes.
gung ho about going forward with it.
Exactly.
Like I said, I think it always is kind of the yin and yang.
Yes.
You have to have one that's
I like that. I like
dichotomically
that.
Opposed to the other.
So and then there were two things I had that disqualify someone as a sidekick. I'll see if you agree with me on this or not. And I think that let's maybe say three things. First is that I think there's a difference between sidekick and mentor. And I think a lot of the things I read online were, so if you look at somebody like Alfred, Alfred's not a sidekick, he's a mentor.
No.
Even though he does fill a lot of the same things that a sidekick does, he is much more of a mentor leadership kind of figure. Which
You use just like the most basic, like if everyone's just like sidekick, everyone would be like Robin, because Robin is the sidekick, you know?
Yeah. Which is it's funny is Robin to me is much more of a protege than he is a sidekick,
But
and that
of course,
he is and then the other one I had on here was that there is a subset of sidekicks which I call number twos, which are evil sidekicks. So you have the easiest one is look at the Bond franchise, which is literally where number two comes from, and Austin Powers did a great job.
You're talking about like your odd jobs.
Every Bond movie villain has a main henchman, which is their sidekick, which I call the number two because out of Austin Powers, literally named Dr. Evil's number two, which is fantastic. But I think that's a total different subset as well. Also, really a good podcast to talk about evil number twos. And then the last one, which can be argued, but I couldn't come up with a lot of good examples, is that typically the sidekick is the same sex as the lead. Otherwise, they become a romantic. Become a romantic interest.
I knew you were about to bring it up, and one of the reasons why is because I was really trying to wrap my head around, because I was like, I'm not going to be, and I did come up with some really great female sidekicks, and there are a couple that I want to talk about in a second, but but
they're sidekicks to women.
But they're sidekicks to women.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult. There was only one I could think about that is really, fantastic, and I think that I can think of, and I'll bring it up just because I threw it in almost as a bonus.
Okay.
The only real female sidekick I could think of, like in popular modern cinema, was Carrie-Anne Moss playing Trinity in The Matrix, and she's not the sidekick to Neo; she's the sidekick to Morpheus.
Yeah.
And I think it works actually in the dynamic of that movie. I mean, she is
She's his number two. Yeah, I think so.
She is, his number two. And I was like, that's the only thing I could think of is that Trinity is actually a kind of, and she's secondary to. But the thing is because there's another romantic relationship within the context of the story, it completely separates the Morpheus and Trinity and does make it about this kind of mentor-mentee thing that I think does separate from a lot of the other types of movies where I feel like where the people who are sidekicks end up having some sort of, whatever. Because even like if you're thinking about like any movies, for example, earlier we were talking about Kat Dennings. Kat Dennings is a sidekick in Thor: The Dark World.
That's what I brought. It was on my list.
There you go. But she's the sidekick to Natalie
Jane. That's right.
To Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a.
There is one good example. There's one good example of strong female sidekick, and that's in the Doctor Who series where they have which they replace out. And that's one of the very few that I could think of where there's very rarely a romantic relationship between the Doctor and I forget what they call the person that's helping the Doctor out. Essentially, it's the Doctor's sidekick. And they've done several females throughout that thing. It's really tricky to pull off.
But I'm wondering if that's not something that's rife for some sort of exploitation, because I think that would be something really fresh.
Well, I mean, you've got Super, which we've talked about a couple times on the podcast, which has a superhero sidekick that's a girl. You could talk about Hit Girl, who is a sidekick too. But again, it's superhero. I see what you're doing. I wanted something not so pulpy. Where you've got it, and it is tricky to. I mean, you could argue. I think they exist more in ensemble pieces, and they exist more in play work. So you look at something like A Few Good Men. So A Few Good Men has a character that in the original play was played by a man, and in the movie it's played by Demi Moore. That's basically Tom Cruise's buddy and lawyer friend. That works, but that's also, there's so many characters and things. It's not like
and there's also but I also feel like they, for a movie like that, they also start amping up some of the like that's a little bit of a kind of an attraction sort of thing. I mean, they do play that,
which ruins it every time, which is
it sucks. But there's I feel like there's an interesting line that you could walk there and make something kind of interesting about it. But for example, one of the things I want to talk about, just the last little bit of kind of explanation when it comes to sidekick, what we would define as a sidekick. The last thing that I would add that neither you or I think have brought, is that I feel like the range can go one end to very broad comedic side. Sure. And I'll give you an example is Kato, not Kato in the Green Hornet, but Kato in the Pink Panther series. You know, they're just kind of a wildly broad character, you know, that's hysterical and very funny or whatever, and is there to help, but sometimes doesn't really help. You know,
they're there as just a punchline.
Kato. But anyways, I would go to the exact opposite side, where the ones that I didn't see listed as sidekicks, which I completely feel is you know, legitimized, at least in my opinion. I'm assuming you've seen Anthony Minghella's Cold Mountain.
Yes.
Okay, so Ruby, the Academy Award-winning performance by Renee Zellweger as Ruby, is the sidekick to Nicole Kidman's character. Okay. She shows up and is basically that. She fills that void and is that type of personality because she's this meek or whatever, and she's this other strong, and she's all proper, and she whatever. Yeah. And they're this complete counterbalance, and she's a supporting character.
Basically playing Calamity Jane.
Yes, exactly. But I think that it's a strong performance. It's a fantastic performance. So I was going to say, it's funny because you can go from completely artful on that end to completely broad, just complete over-the-top, even racist comedy.
And I'll completely argue that Renee Zellweger, part of her role is to be a comedic present.
No, I wasn't saying she wasn't comedic.
No, I understand. Well,
she's in the context
one
of
that's
a
on
much
my
larger
list that I don't even want to say because I'm fairly certain it's on your list, and if it's not, I'll be very surprised. But it's a film series, at least, that you're much more interested in than I am. But it's one of my favorite sidekick characters. But
it definitely is. Then it's probably the easiest one on the list.
Yeah, I would probably.
Let's just go into it then.
Hey, we're talking about Samwise Gamgee.
We're talking about Samwise.
Do you want to have a little?
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
First things first, Sean Astin was denied an Oscar nomination and win for Samwise Gamgee.
It just sucks. I mean, because it was such a good. I mean, first of all, from Page to Celluloid, that was such a great performance.
Yeah,
and probably one of the truest, one of the ones that felt the most genuine. You know, from text to screen, and it was completely passed over. I mean, and the thought that I know that I think in a couple of years they were going hard for other people. Obviously, Ian McKellen for a win, you know, and others. And you don't want to have to muddy up that category by having two people in the same movie.
Well, first of all, Ian McKellen is the best actor in Fellowship of the Ring, and Sean Astin is best actor in The Return of the King by, I would say, leaps and bounds above everything else that's happened in that movie.
I would 100% agree with that. There's no better way to say it than that.
And you know I've never quite gravitated to these series, but that I remember watching Astin, especially in that scene. I mean, and that's such a great character moment. I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. And then I also love the postscript with his character that he's the one burdened with having held it for just the smallest amount of time that it didn't like destroy him,
right?
But it ruins the rest of his life,
right?
Like it stays with him forever.
I mean I love the fact that they left the Shelob fight until Return of the King, because he has that moment at the beginning of the movie where he's get away from her, you filth or whatever.
Yeah.
So he has this he has multiple heroic moments, but it really does just kind of turn this big corner in that movie, with multiple letdowns and stuff like that. Yeah. So I 100% agree. It's one of it. Because he's a tragic character in a way, because he's gullible and he is kind of dumb. He is the dumb hobbit, he's never been outside of home. He's just naive, and Frodo, for what naivety he has, is at least sort of worldly because of his experiences with Bilbo and Gandalf.
Well, and Frodo chooses it, and Sam chooses his friend, and it just happens because he chooses the friend that he has to go in this. Anyways, this path.
I think it's not something you have to dwell on. He is one of the best psychic characters of all time, because I think what brings it, the difference between, like, we talk about what void did they fill. Mm-hmm. Frodo fills the role of like drive and like necessity, and saying like, I have to do this, and sort of his responsibility.
Sure.
Whereas Sam is his heart. Sam is kind of the heartbeat for him, and the thing that keeps him going.
Well, and that's great. What Sam's speech there is all about home. It's all about it's about what Frodo is fighting for. Here's why you need to keep going and doing this.
Echoes back to the last line of the first movie in Fellowship, where he says, Mordor, seems whatever. So he's like, oh, we'll be there soon or whatever. And he just says, I'm really glad you're here with me, Sam. Yeah. And then they walk away into this. That's the end of the fucking movie. I still remember so many people were pissed off.
They're in a boat. Like,
no, they just got off the boat, and they walk up to the ridge and they see Mordor. Don't argue with me on Lord of the Rings, bro.
Sorry.
But anyways, yeah. So you don't have to talk about it much more. It's just it's a really brilliant portrayal of. It's a really well written kind of sidekick role, but the film version really brought the portrayal of that character to the forefront, and I think he is really all of the parts that Frodo is missing. He's the part that gets him to that next level. And when the ring is destroyed, it's ultimately Sam's journey and his victory as much as it is Frodo's.
No, and it's great, and that's a very well-rounded, that has a huge impact, I think, on the story character. One that's kind of on my list, and I can really choose this from any of the medium in which this character has appeared. Mine is Watson. To Sherlock Holmes.
Well, that's a very popular one, I think.
It's a hugely popular one,
but because it perfectly checks all the roles.
Exactly.
It really does. It's an absolute just lock, right?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with Watson is the same thing that's interesting with kind of what you look at with Samwise, is that again where are they filling in the holes in the protagonist, right? What deficiency? Okay. All right. God damn it.
Are you going down the elementary road here? Watson, fill my holes.
Oh no.
Anyways, well, it's okay.
All right. First of all, if you want to have a great time, just look up Watson Holmes fan fiction, and you're going to see a lot of porn that you never thought you wanted to see,
and a lot of Lucy Liu lookalikes.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean just the male side of it is. Sure. There's quite a bit, but I've always liked Watson as a character. From where it first made sense to me, that was interesting, is there was a movie in the 80s called Without a Clue. That is Michael Caine and Ben Kingsley, and it's a retcon of Sherlock Holmes, where you find out that Sherlock Holmes is an idiot. He's a bumbling Pink Panther Inspector Clouseau fool, and then it's Watson who is actually solving and fixing all of the stuff.
I think we discussed this.
Yeah, we talked about it on one of the podcasts, but I love that idea of thinking about what is Watson's role, what is his purpose for Holmes, because Holmes hates, in every iteration of Holmes, he hates almost everyone. He can't deal with anyone. The only person he can deal with is Watson, and they bicker and carry on like an old couple.
Yeah, they are. They're like old.
But Watson is and Holmes constantly tells Watson he's dumb or that he's stupid or whatever, but it's the only person he actually respects. And I think that's an interesting side of a sidekick interaction that's not always apparent, is that the lead character sticks around with these people for a reason. And there has to be a reason for them that's at some point altruistic, that makes it so. I think you have Frodo keep Sam around for reasons that are important to him. Same as Holmes has this sidekick for himself, where Holmes is smart enough to solve all of these things on his own, but he can't beat himself. He can't. There's too much going on in his head. There's too much strife in his life. He needs this other person to bounce things off of and kind of and like I said, fill the holes, the deficiencies that he has on there. But yeah, Watson's always been. I'm almost always more interested in who they cast as Watson anytime there's a new Holmes retelling than I am in who they cast as Holmes. So I think he's the most interesting character in that storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're probably just talking about like all iterations of it.
Really, all of them.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it always works well against one. I mean, those characters work well against one another. But yeah. I actually really do like the way that Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. play off of one another.
They're fantastic, and Martin Freeman is wonderful in Sherlock against Peg. It's
Peg Benedict.
Benedict is.
Yeah, I thought you said Peg. For
no.
I was just like, what?
Well, no. What's kind of interesting also is that it's so they always cast this like Simon.
Imagine Simon Pegg as Sherlock Holmes.
First of all, I will watch a Simon Pegg.
There was no thing. I don't know what I'm talking about. Where is this?
I would totally watch that. I do love that. Like, so you cast Robert Downey Jr. as Holmes, and you're like, fuck, who are you going to put in a room with him that's not going to get overpowered? Yeah, you cast Jude Law. And the same with Benedict Cumberbatch is such a force as well, and you get somebody like Martin Freeman who can really play a very opposite. I mean,
straight man, yeah.
And he's
Martin Freeman's one of the best straight men.
He's so good in that show because he is so. He has to run so hard in the opposite direction of Cumberbatch. It's really thrilling to watch. I enjoy it.
No, I absolutely enjoy it too.
And when we talk about sidekicks, by the way, there's also a variety of medium that sidekicks can be in, or genres. So you may have an action movie, which is very popular to have a sidekick in, and it's also notoriously dangerous territory because most of the really terrible sidekicks are found in action movies. And my favorite, of course, is Rob Schneider and Judge Dredd, which is maybe the most maligned sidekick of all time, other than Jar Jar Binks, which I saw show up on a few.
And that's I think there is obviously, that they're always trying to find sort of this really good, middle ground where you can have a main character, no matter what the medium or what the genre is, and you're going to try and find somebody who can play right off of them or whatever. And a lot of times it's forced. It's a forced thing. I mean, I can name just as many Arnold movies where your second guy is not that great, or where your sidekick is not somebody who's
Predator, where all of the sidekicks are fantastic.
Yes, well,
every one of them.
Every single sidekick in Predator is
Shane Black
awesome.
can write good sidekicks.
Well, let's wait until this weekend.
We'll see.
Let's wait until the Predator because it's not gotten good reviews.
Now, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So there also are polarizing sidekicks. There are sidekicks that half of the audience loves.
Short Round.
And the other half of the audience hates. So Short Round's the king of that list. We're going to get to Short Round. Don't worry. Short Round is going to be talked about
Sloth?
here. No. Number one on my list was Ruby Rod in The Fifth Element. Maybe one of the most polarizing sidekick characters I can think of.
Yeah, I don't mind it in the context of the movie.
Sure.
Because I feel like it's so stylized in its presentation that character does not necessarily feel unwarranted.
They're not a left turn for you.
I'm also a Fifth Element apologist. I don't. I like that movie a lot, probably more than I should. But I recognize its faults, but I don't think it's a bad movie.
No, I'm a huge fan. I love The Fifth Element. I have unapologetically. I don't.
Yeah.
Anyone that tells me that's a terrible movie, I don't really
But I'm
want
just
to
saying.
hang out with.
But you agree with that? My assessment.
Yeah,
that it's not.
it's look, and Ruby Rod especially is where you can, if someone's going to hate on that movie, the first thing they're going to pick out is
Sure.
Ruby Rod on there. But another thing happens with sidekicks that they can tend to be grating or too broad, and Short Round is a great example. And I'm very interested in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom as a whole as a movie. It's one of my, I think it is the one of those underrated Indiana Jones movies. It often gets put kind of low on there.
We agree and disagree simultaneously on this, because I think the point was, and what Lucas pretty much said, not Spielberg, was that with Temple of Doom, they were trying to go back to something that was much more serial, like an Errol Flynn movie where it was just kind of ridiculous and over the top or whatever, and it was just just super bombastic,
but also really dark.
Yeah. Well, but they also just took this kind of dark turn on
Yeah.
it. But it was a very clear, decisive turn into something. The only reason I don't particularly love Temple of Doom is because Raiders and Last Crusade have such a good synergy together,
Sure.
that the movie in between them kind of feels out of place. Now, there are parts of it I love, and there are set pieces I love, and I actually love Short Round. He's not going to be one of my favorite of all time, but he's the first one that ever came. Like, you said Sidekicks, I said no.
Dr. Jones, no time for love.
Yeah,
That's exactly what Ben
No
said
time-
in that voice.
So I said, no time for love. That was the first thing I said. But it's because, Short Round's become an iconic character. And because people love and hate that
Well, and also
movie.
because
and love and
we
hate
watched that
character.
movie as kids, and
Sure.
it was a kid that was involved in that stuff. And I'm always interested when people automatically dismiss something because of the introduction of a kid into it. And I
Yeah,
think there are
that's
a lot
true.
of poorly done introductions of kids into things, but I also think, speaking of Shane Black, I like the kid in Iron Man 3. I think it works for me.
The Kid in Iron Man 3 works for me, too.
and it doesn't work for everybody, but Short Round...
It didn't work so much for Superman Returns.
No.
It's the worst part of that movie, actually. I like that movie.
No, yeah, and it didn't need to be. It didn't. There was no necessity for it whatsoever.
for that in that movie.
But yeah, I think there are good uses of kid, bad uses of kid. But Short Round has extra stuff. God damn it, man.
No. I wasn't
Come
going
on,
there.
man.
No, I wasn't
Come
going
on,
there.
man.
I started laughing because I was just like it's some disposable thing. He's like,
Yeah, we could use this good part of the kid to get rid of the bad part of the kid.
Get rid of the bad part.
Okay.
Yeah, just use the good kid. Use the good kid. Just get the good kid in there. Get the dog.
No,
in
none of
there.
that bad kid shit.
Get the dog in there. Get the bad kid out.
Yeah. No, I think Short Round has a lot going against him, right?
Oh, sure.
In general,
And
he's a
somehow, at least in retrospect, manages to be endearing to me.
Yeah, no, he's a little bit racially charged, right? And he's also just this child actor. But I mean, I also love the Goonies, so I loved that actor as well. Like that, I was like, oh, this is this kid. I've seen him in these other things. It works for me in that movie, and it works partially because of what you said. Is that movie is very broad, even though they go dark and a lot of shit. The one of my favorite scenes in that movie, or my favorite editing in that movie, is the editing of the scene where Indy and Willie are waiting for one another to see who's the first one's going to break down and go to the other one's room. And it's scored beautifully by John Williams with this almost ticking clock kind of soundtrack that's on there. And he's like, she's not coming. And then it's her. And go back and he's like, he's not coming. Like it's where Spielberg is so good at comedy that I'm like, I know he got burned when he did 1941 and he'll never do like a full all out comedy, but I would love to watch a just balls to the wall comedy by Spielberg. 100%.
Sure, totally.
But yeah, Short Round, it gets a plus from me. Who else is on your list?
Before I get to the big one
Uh-oh.
that I want to talk about, that's not listed.
It's Ben's penis. It fills in all of the things that when Ben gets pretentious and you don't like it, you're like, oh no, this Ben's penis, like he's so much fun.
Fills in all the holes. But anyway, no, it's definitely not my penis. No, the one that I just can't believe, because like I said, I had to do some cursory research to see what people said about this. I like to come up with these lists organically, make a list, and then see what people.
We do the same. We do
the same thing, and see what people agree with and see what people don't agree with. But the one that everyone agrees with, that I think is one of my sort of quintessential sidekicks, is Cameron Fry.
Yes,
played by Alan Ruck in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yep.
I love that character. I mean, as a matter of fact, the fun thing is when I saw Ferris Bueller at actually a very young age, it was one of the first, after Batman, it was one of the first PG-13 movies I think I ever saw. Which I didn't understand all the jokes, but I still loved it at a very young age, at 8 or 9 years old. We're right after it came out on VHS.
The genius of John Hughes, that you can watch that at once every 10 years and get something new out of it.
But then I watched it 2 years later, and then again 2 years later. By the time I got to high school, I had that movie fucking memorized. But I always associated more with Cameron than I did with Ferris, because Ferris was just too fucking cool for me.
Because Ferris is a superhero. He's not a real human
he's not
being.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously there's the whole conspiracy theory that Ferris actually the Fight Club thing where it's Ferris doesn't actually exist. It's actually just Cameron, and Ferris is it's dumb.
It's dumb theory.
It's a dumb theory. It's kind of fun. It's funny, but it's a dumb
It's
theory.
fun to talk about, but it's a terrible theory.
It's a terrible theory. It just doesn't make any goddamn sense. And John Hughes wrote this fucking movie.
You're a fucking idiot if you think that theory is real.
But anyways, no, I love Alan Ruck's performance in that movie, but always because he was the one who was just who was really nervous and just never, whatever. And one of my favorite lines in the movie is, Ferris is up there dancing in a fucking parade. And him and Sloane are walking down, and she's just like, what do you want to do when you grow up? He goes, nothing. and she goes, me too. And it's this very fun it's one of my favorite moments in the movie, and it's just this great performance between a couple of of young actors. And although even Alan Ruck was 27 when that
he was really old. I mean, even when I was little, I was like, this guy is really old.
Yeah, but ultimately I just love the fact that he is this super kind of nervous, but you can tell is hyper intelligent and just doesn't want to. And still, of course, you have all of the iconic scenes. I feel like most of the iconic scenes kind of come with him. The falling in the pool and the
because Ferris doesn't work without Cameron, and that's what again where that perfect definition I think with the sidekick comes in is that maybe that's another good definition. Without the sidekick, the hero is no longer as compelling to watch because there's nothing for them to work off of.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And by the way, pardon my French, but you're an asshole. This is George Peterson.
Rooney!
Rooney!
We used to... a good buddy of mine, Scott Patrone, who does my all-time favorite impersonations. I steal as many... The really good ones I steal from him, but we used to hang out at Rooney's in Abacoa in Jupiter, Florida, and every time he'd walk in, he'd go, Rooney! Every time, always made me laugh.
That's great. Anyways, well, that's one I just wanted to bring up because
it's a great one.
I love the character, and it does appear on a lot of lists.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there were lots of lists as far as kind of looking at things like, I looked at Goose from Top Gun, and looked at there are a lot of just very quintessential ones, and I wanted to try to find some more personal to me. And one of the ones that I really liked because it's a different type of sidekick, but it's one of my favorite kind of sidekick archetypes, and it's Inigo Montoya, which is the sidekick who starts off as an enemy, who in turn becomes an ally of the hero.
Fucking awesome.
And fills in their thing. And I mean, literally, I boiled this all down to one interaction with them, which is, let's see if I can figure it. There, here we go.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you.
You seem a decent fella. I hate to die.
And that's
Actually, one of the best lines in the movie.
It's so well delivered by both of those actors,
and actually in the spirit of the book too. I mean, it's not
absolutely.
It's very. That's one of the things that Rob Reiner did really well about the movie. Even though the movie veers very, very hard from the book, the spirit of lines like that feel like very much like something that would have been written in the book.
Yeah,
So.
and it's my favorite movie. So I will always continue to bring it up in podcasts here and there, but. Inigo's great because Inigo starts off. Inigo has no real purpose or alliance other than avenging his father's death. He allies himself with a guy who gets in the revenge business. He meets this traveler that
I am waiting for Mazzini.
He meets this man that he's supposed to fight. And they both have this like great conversation with one another, and they have this like wonderful. Basically, they have a first date, and he's like, and that line comes like, you seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you. Like, there's a general respect between the two, and I love that their fight ends with the man in black sparing his life because he was like, I would sooner smash a stained glass window than you. But since I can't have you following me, and clocks him out.
Yeah.
There's this great mutual respect, and then his purpose becomes more than just the vengeance for his father's death. It now becomes this man that bested him.
Right.
That he can't get over that this person bested him.
Fighting the man in black.
And this man has one purpose to live for, and it's true love. And that's the one thing that Inigo has to help him reach it. And I love that they're not, other than the fact that they begin on opposite sides, they're very much aligned as far as their character traits.
Their purposes are not that far apart.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, because it was the love for his father and the
exactly
love, whatever, and that was taken from him. And in a way, it's kind of Wesley's sort of same deal, but just in a kind of different context. So,
I mean, and what's great is Inigo's fight against the Six Finger Man is what allows Wesley to go and fight Humperdinck. It's great, but yeah,
you about to say Butterface?
I was gonna say Buttercup, then Humperdinck, then Humperfuck.
Butterfuck.
Humperfink and Butterfuck.
Anyways,
that fucking movie's hard to talk about. Who else do you have? So you have a big one on your list.
Well, I've got the last one I really want.
All right, let's hear it.
So it didn't show up on any list. I don't understand how it didn't. And the ironic part is that I don't know if you are familiar with the director George Cosmatos. He did very few. Very popular movies. He did movies like Leviathan with Peter Weller.
I am a big fan of Leviathan.
Oh, really? Even though it's aliens underwater?
Well, there was Leviathan and Deep Star 6, which came out almost at the same time, and they were both great underwater sea creature movies.
He directed First Blood Part 2.
Okay, all right.
But he'd done pretty much kind of trashy... Well, he also did... what's the movie with Peter Weller and the rats? Where like he fights the rats. I mean that's actually a really good movie. Oh man, I forgot the name of it. Anyways,
RoboCop versus the rats.
RoboCop versus the rats. It was right around the time RoboCop came out. I wonder which one came first. But anyways, it's something of origin, species of origin. I have no idea.
Sounds familiar.
Anyways, well the guy unfortunately passed away in 2001, but he directed one I think what you would call quintessential American quote unquote classic.
Okay.
And that is Tombstone.
Oh, wow.
So, Tombstone, I believe, is not a great film, but it is a great movie.
100%.
It is an awesome... Because the thing is, it doesn't have the artfulness of, say, a Wyatt Earp or Dances with Wolves or anything along those lines. It has this raw, like, action quality that's just super visceral. I mean, and that you understand.
Sure.
He's directed First Blood Part 2, and he's done... This is a guy that comes from the action
It's a super fun summer blockbuster movie.
It's a super fun summer blockbuster movie, and it had never really been done in the Western sense of, like, having something that was just that much of an event.
It hadn't been done good. You see, and they did Young Guns, right? Young Guns tried to do what Tombstone did, but it didn't do it well.
Silverado did it first. first.
Oh, Silverado's great.
But see, I like Silverado, but Silverado wasn't super well received at the time. It had one of the greatest casts of all time. And you're talking about the movie.
Kasdan, man.
Yeah, well, it was the movie that discovered Kevin Costner. But you had Jeff Goldblum, and you had, Danny Glover, and the actual Danny Glover, not Donald Glover, and, Kevin Kline. That's a callback to a previous episode. But anyways, yeah, but you had all this just insanely great cast or whatever, but
everyone is in Tombstone. Everyone.
But so Tombstone did the same thing, but they basically brought it into the action formula, into the Predator formula,
Sure.
into just being like whatever. But the one thing that elevates that movie from being just passable fun action to
Val
the next
Kilmer.
level is Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday in that movie. And he is a perfect sidekick because he's completely different than Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp character and perfectly plays that. And I don't have to say much because hopefully your viewers here, everyone we're talking to has seen Tombstone, because if you haven't, you're missing off on like the biggest like machismo, like biggest man moments since probably after Predator. Since then, I can think of very few.
Well, and what's great about that character, about his Doc Holliday, is that he also subverts the medium a little bit, and that he is very much not. He is not entirely aligned in the same goal as the lead, and he is in any other story he could be the bad guy.
Exactly.
Which makes him very interesting.
Because he's sideways and he's impaired and he's frail, and but because he happens to be friends with, and there's even the moment and the things he's like, "You're my friend, Wyatt," and it's just like the whole thing really just gets me as a sidekick, because there are other great characters and other great I was about to say side pieces.
You can be my side piece any day.
This week is sidekicks. Next week is side pieces. But anyways, no, he does subvert the formula a little bit. But
I like it.
He is one of my favorite sidekicks of all time, and I think he fills that. I think he's definitively a sidekick. I'm just surprised I never saw him on any list that anybody mentioned.
No, that's it, and that's a great find on that, which I like a lot.
No, I mean, it was that was literally the first thing that came to my mind. It was like, I have to put Doc Holliday from Tombstone,
and that's really, and it's funny. It's very interesting how you kind of think of these things and where your mind goes with it. Because my first thoughts went to, which I'll make my last one, which is kind of a trio, but as I mentioned before, I'm a big Kevin Smith fan, and I love Kevin Smith sidekicks.
Well, of course, and we like Randall's a sidekick.
Randall, Banky, and Brody, which I put as my big three, right? Are my kind of favorite type of sidekicks. They're very much, there's a straight man lead, and they are the guys that are the funny guy on the side.
The funny guys that also tend to provoke the most problems and create the most problems for their leads,
because they're basically, their role is to change the lead's mind about what their initial course of action is. Really what they maybe Banky a little bit less so. That's kind of that's a different sort of, and he was the only one I almost said he doesn't really fit sidekick status, because he's a little too
it's almost,
prominent in the story.
He's almost a little bit more of a co-lead.
That's kind of what I think. But I think Brody and Randall,
I feel like Mallrats Chasing Amy is a 3-part co-lead movie.
I agree, and that was the only one that I couldn't quite lean into.
It got marketed a little bit more like a romance between, a
guy dates a lesbian, and instead of it being really more of a 3-way kind of thing.
No pun intended.
Which, well, I mean, I had to pull his one line.
Thank Christ.
Which is one of the greatest deliveries of all time.
I mean, like I said, it is one of my favorite lines. It is my favorite line in that movie. And it's I can't remember. There was a time when Nick said "Thank Christ," and it just made me. It might have been on the Gadwell Lane podcast.
I think so.
Oh my gosh! But anyways,
I love that moment just in that movie, because as he says that, both of them just turn and look at him.
Yeah.
And he looks at them like, sorry.
Yeah.
like can't deal with this. But yeah, I think Brody and Randall are, and I mean, Randall literally invokes one of the lines from another character we talked about tonight when he says,
"No time for love, Dr. Jones."
he's getting some, but Brody really for me was kind of that I like that. I always was gravitated towards those characters because they were the characters I gravitated towards on stage as well, because those were the ones I was going to play. I wasn't going to play the lead. I was always destined to play the sidekick.
So what we're basically coming down to, and the thesis of this entire conversation, is that Matt was born to be a sidekick.
This is true, and Ben was born to lead.
I don't think that I was the one. I don't think you found your real leader yet, Matt. I don't think that I'm the man who can lead you. I don't have that power. Maybe you just need 2 or 3 men for that.
Well, and I think there's actually a line in Mallrats where someone says to Brody he says to TS, "You and your sidekick," and Brody goes, "Hey, who says I'm his sidekick? Why can't he be my sidekick?" I love that self-awareness of a character to be like, no, you need to always recognize your role in these things. I have no problem with this. I've said I will be a sidekick.
It kind of reminds me of that line in Scream 2, which hasn't been referenced in a while. But actually, a great Kevin Williamson moment where Jamie Kennedy is in that movie, and I forgot the name of his character, but they're like, "What's the matter?" He's like, "You know, you'll never be this star," and he's just like, "Fuck you," and he's just like, "Yo," he's like, "Oh, you set your sights on me?" Yeah, Randy. He's like, "Why don't you set your sights on some bigger goals here?" He's like, "Well, you're doing this, whatever." Just starts like fucking laying into the killer, and I love that sequence and then he gets killed, of course, because it's just like, oh, he's obviously the sidekick, and they're just like, okay, well, yeah, we're gonna call it out that he's the sidekick, and then we're gonna kill him.
I think it's important to know your role.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the
and
same.
Shut your mouth if you were the Rock.
The Rock. Can you smell what Ben Wilson is cooking?
Yeah. Anyways,
no, I think it's shit. I just lost my train of thought when you got me thinking about Rock's muscles, and I got all flustered.
Oh no,
I got all Twitter pated.
Good note to end on, right there.
I think so. Yeah, I look. Sidekicks are they're not so much the unsung heroes, but they are the only way the story. There is no Han Solo without Chewbacca. There is no James Bond without Q.
There's no Mikey without mouth.
That's right. There's the greatest heroes you could ever think of don't exist without their side piece has been put in. So that's the lesson to you little last piners out there.
I was about to say, I didn't say side piece. I said I was thinking side piece, and I stopped myself. But that's next week's episode.
We will talk about side pieces in depth next week. Nick, better get your notes together. We're going to be going in deep and hard on that one.
He's going to come in with 5 pages. Actually, let's just go with Paul. Paul's going to come in with...
I legitimately have Paul's notes for our Heartbreak Hunt's right over my shoulder. I'm not ever letting them go because it's amazing. It is the greatest manifesto of all time.
We love you.
We love you, Paul. You're not listening to this because you're not on it. We can say whatever we want about Paul. He's not listening to a podcast that he is not on. If you happen to listen to this, Paul, organically, I will pay you $10. So come collect your $10 once you listen to this podcast. Anyway, for the rest of you out there, by the way, Ben, you don't know this, we have a new super fan in David Crespo. Greg has fallen a little bit by the wayside.
Oh, wow.
But David has been, he was very much like the Wilma McAwesome podcast.
Oh, nice.
And now he's turned the corner. He is a New Wave fan. So
okay, well,
so now we have to say to David
welcome,
out there.
And enjoy your time elsewhere.
Yes, and
I'm sorry I didn't see you when you were in town.
This is true. Well, he'll be back at some point. But we thank you so much for listening to the New Way podcast. You can find us everywhere. I don't know how you found us this time. However you found us this time, probably try that again. But we're on Stitcher. We're on Spotify. We are on iTunes. We're all over the place. Or on our website, lastpineprod.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.